Welcome back to the List Lab, episode 3. Today we're going to talk about the Lumineth Realm Lords. I'm Sam Morgan and I'm coming at you live from Gairan Community College. Alright, a little bit of a deviation from our previous approach. So what did we manage to get through? 2 whole episodes doing it a particular way, and we've already mixed it up. So rather than go into a list today, which I think would be premature, given the book's only been out for a couple of days and there's an impending FAQ, which I anticipate will address some of the questions that are arising around the book, particularly around some of the characters and what they're able to do. We'll have a chat today about the Lumineth Realm Lords broadly, where they fit into the current meta. We'll also start to unpack their allegiance abilities, of which there is quite a few. In the next episode, we'll have a look at the spell laws and the great nations. And then once the FAQs come out, we'll then have a look at the war scrolls and the battalions. So in terms of sequencing, then that's when we'd be probably in a position to start to talk about what will a list look like on the table. And what I'm going to try and do with this book is come up with the strongest book possible. And I will be ably supported by our friends in Eastern Europe. I think they'll break the book probably within a couple of weeks of the FAQ being done. So we'll let them grind out games on TTS, and then I'll present their hard work to you as if it's my own homework. So definitive LRL list, probably about 4 to 6 weeks away from the time of recording. All right, let's talk about new releases. So there's something to be said for gamers and new toys coming out. When we first started seeing some of the tidbits from Warhammer community around what was going to be in the Lumineth book, I'm not going to lie, I was hit with a little bit of new toy syndrome. So I saw things like the piling in from the Rue Riders and Severeth, and I thought that is a game-breaking mechanic, the fact that you do not need to pile in towards the closest enemy, and the fact that you count as charging even when you have not charged in some instances, so therefore you're able to do pile-in shenanigans. That is going to be something that your opponent is unable to compete with. And not dissimilar to the activation wars when Feck were the only ones that were able to fight sort of at the start of combat. It felt game-breakingly strong. So that was something to me which was really concerning, and I think this is a bit of a case study in cognitive distortion. We didn't have all of the facts, and when we didn't have all of the facts, we maybe jumped to some conclusions. So, it's what's it called? Inference, observation, confusion, which is basically like a psychological term that says you judge something without having all the facts and you reach the wrong conclusion. And that's certainly something I was guilty of with this book. I had an idea queued up that we'd open with what's the bloke's name? Oppenheimer, and he's just, I am become death, destroyer of worlds. And I was going to do some sort of comparison of the bloke who makes an A-bomb and kills millions of people to a small company in the UK which releases toy soldiers. So that would have been a reasonable thing to draw as a parallel, wouldn't it? Look, I think this happens quite often with Warhammer books. We get some of the information, we assess that against what is known, what's in the current meta, and we make a bit of a snap decision. Sometimes, like in the case of Sylvaneth, in the case of Slanesh, I think it's pretty easy to see when a book is underpowered. When a book is overpowered, though, that's a whole different situation, because it's a question of relativity. How strong is it relative to the other things that are out there? So I guess from my perspective, the learning here is next time maybe just hold off on the hot takes and wait till you see the full book, because in its entirety, this book is a fantastic addition to the game. I think it introduces elements, and it plays around with the pile-in phase, and it plays around with the hero phase in ways perhaps that other armies don't. And I think that those are interesting additions and not necessarily as overpowered as the initial takes might have sort of suggested. So I'm really happy with this book. In my mind, it's on par with Cities of Sigmar, Orruk Warclans, Slave to Darkness as those really top tier books from a list writing perspective, by which I mean there are lots of different directions you can go. There is a heap of things within the book that means that you're going to continually be able to adapt should the meta change. And there's a number of play styles which I think will yield, consistently 3 and 2 and 4 and 1 results. And there's a couple of builds in there which I think could consistently be 5 and 0 builds as well, which as somebody that's interested in that sort of stuff, that's all you can ask for. And I think they've done a really good job overall. We'll have to shoot down some of the things in there because they're awful, but overall, I give this book a massive tick. And certainly, my initial take was off the mark by some margin. All right, so what are the headlines? We're working at the Gyran Gazette. Lumineth Realm Lords drop. What are the headlines in the paper? I think the first one is Teclis. Rumors of my death. Greatly exaggerated. I haven't seen these yet. I'll maybe catch up with them at some stage. Maybe I'll just avoid them. But I understand some of the Warhammer community backup dancers, the commentators out there, are sort of suggesting that Teclis is, in inverted commas, a trap.
It's amazing. You are 100% wrong. I mean, nothing you said has been right.
And from my perspective, that they couldn't be more wrong. Teclis in this book shines. In the previous book, the Ascendant build was Teclis, the battalion which would give you Sentinels, Wardens, and a Cathalar. And then for taste, if you wanted, you could add some Dawn Riders or some other element to your army, but typically you'd be looking at a 2-drop with some endless spells there. That book that list remains the Ascendant build in this book. However, now what you can do with your 600 points after you've paid for Teclis and the battalion, what you can do with that remaining 600 points varies greatly. So I think Teclis remains the mainstay in competitive builds, in 5 and 0 builds. And I think, anyone that's saying that he's a trap or he's somehow gotten worse, which is like a farcical notion, he's added an additional spell or he's added other things that he can buff, that couldn't be further off the mark. So I think he's the main man still, which is cool. I mean, he's a god, and the Broken Realms Teclis, and he's created 2 races. He's created 2 filthy S-tier races. Like this guy's really central to the story of Age of Sigmar, and I'm really glad that we're going to continue to see him on the tabletop. All right, middling LRL player obtains middling results. So this is a super high skill cap army.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
What I mean by that is that it punishes poor play, but also you can get the absolute most out of this with good play. There is so much within the book that is what I would describe at the margins, the way that you pile in your Wardens to utilize that 3-inch range, the spells that you put on, the sequencing in the hero phase, the sequencing in the shooting phase. These things are all marginal, but the sum of them is significant. And what that means is we're going to see a lot of people with very strong lists playing on the middle tables of tournaments. That does not mean that the book is a middle table book. It means that those players are. So get good. All right, Fast Fox fails again. Oh my goodness. Severeth and the Spirit of the Wind. These guys clock in at 300 and 250 points respectively. So at 8 wounds with a 5-up save, they have got a 5-up after save, granted, but 8 wounds with a 5-up save, that is some of the poorest economy in the whole game.
It's a trap!
That is the equivalent of a 4-wound character being 150 points. Like, just think about that. The speed is absolutely fantastic. The ability to interfere with your opponent's terrain, fantastic. All of the things that it can do are fantastic. Should your opponent get one single round of shooting or magic into this guy, he will die. This is like, it's really funny, the power rankings of the various order names characters, because you think about something like Croak, right? 320 points, 20 points more, infinitely better. You think about something like Marathi, twice as expensive, 4 times as good. Teclis in this book, 2.5 times as expensive, significantly better. Like, I think in an army which struggles to get bodies on the board, which struggles to have a presence from an objective claiming perspective, these guys will not see play in top builds. That's not to say that someone won't build an army around them and go 4-1 at some backwater tournament. Well done. Congratulations. Good work. Pat yourself on the back. Awesome effort. Doesn't mean the scroll is good. I think these guys probably better in, say, for instance, like Stormcast or Mixed Order than they are in Lumineth. So not one that I'd be taking. For me, the standout of the new characters is the Cenari Lawseeker. That guy at 160 points, with the ability to get up to a 2-up save, holds objectives. He's fantastic. There obviously is an FAQ to come, and there's a question around whether unique and named is synonymous, because if it is, if unique counts as named, he's not going to be able to take artifacts. I'll leave that up to the FAQ team. I mean, I don't have a view either way, but if he's able to take artifacts, that just pushes him up a bracket again. And then there's another question around, well, some of the objectives you only score from within 3 inches. So if this bloke's able to sit 6 inches away from a 3-inch objective and stop you from scoring, that also opens up some pretty nasty gameplay elements. So I think, the Fox is one of these ones where the model is beautiful, the model is spectacular. I was watching, I'll give a quick shout out to the Aussie Wargamer. The Aussie Wargamer was talking about like the volume and the space and how the model is actually set up to sort of look like it's falling away, how it's not grounded in any sense, and from like a visual art perspective, why that works. So go and check out that video. But he looks stunning, but he's gonna look equally stunning in your dead pile when he's there and sometime in turn 2. All right, where do these guys fit in? So the current meta, and I think this is the definitive list, not contestable. Obviously this is constantly moving. Different people have different opinions, but I've landed on Seraphon. Like, Seraphon is like riding a bike with training wheels. If that's your thing, if you enjoy that, lean into it. Don't let anyone hobby shame you. Just don't act like you're rolling around on a Harley Davidson. You're not a big dog. You're playing easy mode, and that's fine. Skinks, compared to anything in this Lumineth book, just outshine them. Skink characters outshine anything in this book. Croak outshines anything in this book. The whole Seraphon book needs a pretty considerable rethink, if parity is what we're going for as a gaming ecosystem. If we're looking for a system which has a relative level of parity, you'd either ban Seraphon from events or you'd redo their book entirely. Then just a step below easy mode, we've got the S tier books. We've got Ideneth and the Disciples of Tzeentch. Now, it remains to be seen whether once Lumineth are more prominent in the meta, if Ideneth retain their spot here, because what Ideneth don't like is mortal wounds, and what Ideneth don't like is things that detract from their ability to sweep quickly around the board and pile in and fight and do shots at the start of combat and all that sort of stuff. So there is a question of who comes out on top here between the Ideneth and the Lumineth. But for now, I think Ideneth's there. Tzeentch, not dissimilar to Seraphon, needs to get in the bin. It's not playing Warhammer, it's doing some other game, and if that's what you're into, knock yourself out. But for me, those 3 books, Ideneth, Disciples of Tzeentch, and the Realm Lords, they all sit above the fat middle. They all sit above those A-tier armies. That they all consistently should be getting 5-0 results across a tournament season. So, they might bomb at a particular event and only have a couple in the top 10. Those guys have still gone out and gotten 4-1s with their book. So I think that's S tier as it currently stands. I think the game holistically is in a healthy spot. So you're comfortable with four S tier armies. And the common element between the Ideneth Deepkin, the Disciples of Tzeentch, and the Realm Lords is about the extent to which those armies don't play Warhammer. So there's a set of core rules for Warhammer, and the Ideneth Deepkin ignore the rules around targeting in the shooting phase, and they ignore the rules in turn 3 around the sequencing in the combat phase. And those two things coupled, incredibly strong, and separate them from other armies. The Disciples of Tzeentch have a number of rules which don't work in the construct of the game. So they've got things like the Destiny dice, and they've got things like the Splitting Horrors, which are unique to that army and outside of the core rules of Warhammer. And then the Lumineth Realm Lords have Teclis, who's just automatically casting 4 spells a turn at a 10. They've got models that can pile in away from their opponents. They've got a number of rules that are inconsistent with the broader Warhammer rule set, and those things separate them from the fat middle and everything below. All right, so we're going to start to talk about some of those rules now, and this is what makes the army unique. This is also perhaps a criticism of the army, that it is maybe a level of bookkeeping beyond anything else in Age of Sigmar, and that the way that the army functions can be complex. So in the first instance, we've got battle traits, right? These affect the entire army. So everyone in the army is getting Aether Quartz. There's a rule called Absorb Despair and Lightning Reaction. So let's talk about what those things look like. Basically, each unit in a Lumineth army starts with a share of Aether Quartz. Now, there are ways to get multiple shares of Aether Quartz, and we'll address that on a future cast. They can use, as an army, 1 Aether Quartz reserve per phase. So think about, like, in your hero phase, you could use 1, and you could go and use 1 in your shooting phase, and you could go and use 1 in the combat phase, as a typical term might sort of run. So what's that? 6 per battle round, 5 battle rounds. So you've got about 30 shares over the course of a game that you're able to use. No one's going to have 30 units in a Lumineth army, so you're always going to have, every unit is able to use their Aether Quartz, which isn't necessarily the case with the comparable rule over in the Kharadron Overlords. It's not uncommon for some of their builds to have an excessive amount of, what if they got Aether Gold? All right, so there's 4 things, you can choose from here. You can go with Heightened Reflexes. So this one gives you +1 to your armor saves until the end of that phase. So the thing is, you need to have been picked as a target. So if you know a unit has Aether Quartz, you could potentially avoid it because as soon as you pick them, they're gonna use this Aether Quartz for +1 save. I was playing a game against Lumineth this week, and I was shooting Mortek Crawlers who don't have any rend, and I was deliberately targeting units that had already used their Aether Quartz reserve, because with a shooting profile that's damage 5 but no rend, any pip of save makes a really significant change to what you're able to sort of deal from a damage perspective. So that's a really good one. Obviously, if you double tap that, if you use 2 Aether Quartz in the sub factions that allow it, +2 to your saves, phenomenal. And you think about someone like Teclis, if you need to save him for a particular turn, if you need him to survive, that's your win condition. Amazing. The next one's called Heightened Senses. Basically, Heightened Senses is +1 to hit rolls. Lumineth typically hit pretty well, but if that's it, because it's shooting or fighting, there are times when a character might have Lookout Sir, and this cancels that out, and that's obviously really effective when the shooting's putting out mortal wounds on 5s, and there's ways to get rerolled hits. It means that 19 shots from a unit of 20 sentinels is able to do quite significant damage and consistently kill 5 wound characters, which is the name of the game. If we're trying to stop our opponent from getting their buffs up, that's what we want to be doing. The next one's Magical Boost. I think Lumineth have like 10 heroes that are wizards. They've got 3 units that are wizards. They have really, really significant and onerous command phases, and this Magical Boost is either +1 to your cast or re-roll the cast. So you roll your dice, you go, cool, I've hit a 7, I'd like to add +1 to that to make it an 8. So you know the result before you do it. You roll a 3, you go, cool, I'd like to re-roll that. Like, it's fantastic, and it provides the army with consistency. And when you've got a low model, high output army, consistency is king. Anything you can do to remove any aberrant rolls is worth looking into and worth doing. And then the final one is Magical Insight. So you can say a unit will use this ability at the start of the hero phase. So this is the only one that's conditional from its timing perspective. If someone's cast a few spells and then they say, you know what, I want to use Magical Insight, they've missed their chance to do that. And with an army like this, which is so contingent on bookkeeping, I think that's one where you'd actually hold your opponent to account and say, nah, champ, you've missed that shot. if you do this, you can cast an extra spell. So already mentioned that there are ways to get casting bonuses in this army. Already mentioned that the things like mortal wounds of a premium. So there might be times when that second spell is a difference between killing a unit outright or leaving it alive, killing a character outright or leaving it alive, getting a teleport off, whatever it might be. It's a really important spell, so just one to keep an eye out for. The thing is, if they've used that right, you can use this at the start of your hero phase. You then know they're only able to use one per phase. So if they've already used that magical insight, you know they're not going to use the magical boost. And again, that's something to be aware of, because the Lumineth book is so complicated in terms of its options. None of the options are hard to understand. The sum of the options is hard to keep on top of. So you just need to keep that in mind if you're playing against the Lumineth. Can't do both in the same phase, with some notable exceptions. All right, the next one there, Absorb Despair. So this one is awesome. One thing I failed to mention about the Aether Quartz is once you use your Aether Quartz, you subtract one from your bravery for the rest of the battle. So already a low bravery army, use the Aether Quartz, drop down a point of bravery again. However, if the army has any Cathalars, that they can actually choose one of your units within 18 and they can make them -1 bravery. So that's an amazing ability to have, that you just look at an enemy unit that's within 18 of you and they're -1 bravery. That one, again, it's capped at 1. So if anyone's trying to double tap you or triple tap you with the Absorb Despair, that's not something that they can do. The same enemy unit cannot be affected by this ability more than once per battle. Now, in the next episode, we're going to talk about the spell law. And when we talk about the spell law, debuffs to bravery are critical to this army. They can enable you to do some truly horrendous things, and they can be stacked in ways which are quite oppressive. So we'll come back to this one in a future episode. But yeah, the ability to drop someone's bravery by 1 shouldn't be understated in the context of this army. And then the final one, and again, so the first two have been amazing, right? This final one is bonkers. Lightning reactions. During the combat phase, when it's your turn to pick a unit to fight, you can pick 2 eligible units instead of 1. Now, there's a really important distinction there. It's when it's your turn to fight that you pick those 2 units. It's not uncommon. I've seen it numerous times that the Lumineth player picks them after the first fight is complete. Now, the reason that that's problematic is because you know the damage that you've inflicted from your first unit. So just say, for instance, you charge 2 units into 1 opposing unit, and then off somewhere else you've got a character fighting a character. You might go with your big unit of Wardens first, right? They don't quite do the damage you'd hope they would do. You then go, oh, the Dawn Riders had also charged, we'll fight now. Well, that's not how you do it. You needed to say that at the start, because it's allowing you to choose something that perhaps you wouldn't have chosen initially. Like say for instance, you have to choose first. You might have gone, that character on the flank is going to fight and the Wardens are going to fight. Done. But because you know the Wardens didn't do the damage output you wanted them to, you're making a different tactical decision. So again, this is the sort of thing where the opponent needs to be really clued onto the minutiae of this book. And this is an amazing ability. You can take units of 10 and 20 guys in this army that are, pumping out 20, 21 attacks, pushing out mortals on 5s, and you can do some really significant damage to multiple units before your opponent has an opportunity to fight back. And you can also do this thing where you look at your numbers and you're looking to hit even numbers in all of the combat phases, and by doing that, you're maximizing the efficacy of this one. So those are the battle traits. Those affect the whole army, regardless of what your keywords are, that they will affect you. Then we start to look at these little, they're not sub-factions because those come later, in terms of the great nations, right? But these are these little keywords that exist in the army that affect only models with that keyword. So first up, let's have a look at the Venari. So these guys were from the first book, and they've retained their same rule, and that's called Shining Company. So basically the way that Shining Company works is if every model in your unit is touching the bases of 2 or more other models, you're -1 to hit. That's amazing. And the trade-off for being -1 to hit is that you can never run or charge, and you can only ever pile in 1 inch. So it's a really defensive stance, and the opponent finds it difficult to hit you, but equally you find it difficult to press forward. Now, If your opponent is in Shining Company, they're not going to be able to charge you. However, in the movement phase, there's nothing stopping them from just breaking their units apart so that they're not touching 2 models in every base. So there's nothing stopping your opponent from, say, for instance, if you fight first, there's nothing stopping your opponent from removing a casualty in such a way that he's no longer in Shining Company, and then he's able to pile in 3. So as an opposing player, again, that's something you want to be aware of. Next up, we've got the Skinari. So these guys have just got the Deep Thinkers. They're wizards. I mentioned earlier the Law Seeker. He's someone that's able to do this. And basically the way that it works is you opt not to cast a spell, and then in the next turn, you automatically cast a spell with a 9. Amazing. Fantastic. And we'll go through the spell laws in the next cast, but there is a lot of options and a lot of utility that can be derived from this one, because it's an army with so many spells that giving up a spell on a particular wizard in a trade, knowing that you're automatically going to cast on a 9 the next turn, sometimes is absolutely worth it. All right. Now we've got the new guys. Hurricane, something. These guys, they're the wind spirits, and they've got an ability called Move Like the Wind.
Scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
When you make a pile-in move, it does not have to finish its move at least as close to the nearest enemy model. That is bonkers. You can pile in away from them. You can pile in towards another model you want to fight. You can do you can drag yourself out of combat. You do all sorts of fantastic things. And there's going to be a fair few gotchas with these guys on the table. People are going to think that they're in a particular position, only to find that by doing their activations in the wrong sequence, all of a sudden the Lumineth player is actually completely free, and possibly even in a more favorable position than where they started. In addition, when you make a pile-in move with these guys, if you made a charge in the same move, it can fly and it can move an extra 3 inches. So 6 inches, any direction using fly. That is insanely strong. That is fantastic. The models that have this rule aren't necessarily particularly strong from an output perspective, but they are fantastic from a negative play perspective, and they are fantastic from an objective scoring or contesting perspective. So what this gives you is something completely unique to this army, and something that shouldn't be underestimated. So this is the sort of thing I think you need to see on the table. You need to see this on the table. And I might even do a little video for my Twitter, just of some of the things you can do with this from, a sneaky play perspective. Now, the other thing to be aware of is that, and we'll get to this later, but there are ways to do that to create that situation where you've charged, in inverted commas, even where you haven't charged. So there will be some lists built around these guys, and those lists will be highly optimized from a shenanigans perspective. They won't be highly optimized from a winning games perspective. And just finally, we've got our stone people from the first book. So the Alarith, they've got this enduring as a rock. And basically the way that one works is where you've got Rem 1, you change it to a dash. And again, they've got a sub-faction that can change that to Ren 2 to a dash, which is fantastic. Couple that, Ren 1 doesn't count as Rem 1. I'm using my Aether Quartz to be +1 save. Amazing. Fantastic. And then the other one is Tectonic Force. Now, this is one that I don't typically see played, so I don't know whether Lumineth players are actively choosing not to play it, if there's too much bookkeeping and they're forgetting it, what the situation is. So at the end of each combat phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 1 each of each Alarith unit. You cannot pick the same enemy more than once. After you pick each unit, your opponent must move that unit 2 inches, and that unit must finish more than 1 inch from the Alarith unit from your army, if it's possible to do so. Once you've done that, the Alarith units that are within 3 inches compile in 1 inch. So what happens here is I choose a unit, I push that unit backwards, I then move into the space that's been created, right? If you think about what happens quite often in games is you'll have a unit, like I play 10 zombies in almost all of my death armies, right? 10 zombies, 10 chain rasps, 10 whatevers. And what they do is they hug the very back edge of an objective. And the reason that they do that is I want to create the most space physically possible between myself and the enemy, because they will die to a stiff breeze. If you're able to get into that unit, right, and push them back, it means you're pushing me off the objective. Alternatively, I look at that and go, oh, okay, these stone guards, what they can do means that I need to play differently. All of a sudden, my zombies are 2 inches further up. And what does that mean? Maybe it means that they're in range for shooting. Maybe it means they're in range for some cheeky mortal wounds in the hero phase. It's changing the way that I play, and it's changing the way that I play in a way that only benefits the Lumineth player. So from my perspective, if you remember it, it's a great rule to have. And ultimately, the Enduring as a Rock is such a strong battle trait anyway. Anything you're getting extra is gravy. All right, so that's the battle traits. Like I said, like army-wide, we've got these battle traits. Then keywords, they've got their own particular battle traits. Then all of a sudden, we've got our great houses, our great nations, whatever they are. The sub-factions are going to have additional rules. Then there's 3 spell tables. Then there's, as I've already mentioned, 10 wizards that have their own spells. So this army is a combo army, and it's something that we sort of have to build up over time. But already you can see that what this army gets, more than almost any other army, I think, in the game, as a set of allegiance abilities, really propels it up the tier list. Because the War Scrolls in isolation are quite good, but the War Scrolls combined with the battle traits, I think, are really starting to push into that fantastic level. All right, so that's us done for this week. Just some quick shout outs. I've been listening to so much music. I don't know if people do this, but I go through phases where it's like, am I watching 2 movies a night, or am I listening to 7 hours of music a day, or am I reading a book every couple of days? Do you know what I mean? And that sort of alternates. The same probably is true of painting as well. And this week it's just been all about music for me. I probably racked up like 30 hours on the Apple Music. So for anyone that's interested in music, Strong Songs podcast is just this fantastic podcast that goes into deep dives of lots of the great songs. I'm listening to one at the moment by the Beach Boys, and the harmonics are just unreal, and the way the guy breaks it down is unreal, and the layering, and just absolutely worth listening to. Really just high quality podcast. Nina Simone, I've been going for walks. It's autumn here. The leaves are falling. Listening to a bit of Nina Simone. She's got this beautiful, harrowing voice. Can't recommend her highly enough. And then the other one that I've been listening to is the Bloody Beetroot. So used to go to a lot of festivals in my early 20s. Was texting some of my festival mates recently when Daft Punk broke up, just sort of lamenting the end of Daft Punk, and that got us talking about other concerts, and we went and saw the Bloody Beetroots a long time ago now, and I've been giving them another go, and they've been pumping me up at the gym. All right, next week, what are we going to do? So I did want to do a cast where I looked at the Cursed City Scrolls. Now that we've seen them, and I'm focused on the Death Scrolls, now that we've seen them and the significant points investment to get them in, I think it's like over 600 points for 8 individual units or something along those lines. I might give that a miss and instead look at the Slaves to Darkness list that went on to win the South Australian Grand Tournament a couple of weeks ago. So I had the good fortune of playing Andreas at the event. Fantastic human. Taught me a thing or two about Warhammer, and I'd love to go deep on his list. I've thought about it quite a bit since then, and it has tech upon tech upon tech. And then once we've done that, I'm thinking that I might do the strongest list in Age of Sigmar, which is obviously the Fangs of Sotek. But I don't think people necessarily are aware of just how strong that is, and how much versatility that has, and the fact that the strongest Fangs of Sotek list in fact has 3 allied Stormcast units in it. So that is the shows that I've got coming up, and then hopefully at some point we get this Soul Blight. I'm dying for that release.